Guy Stephen Needler. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. Glad you could make this call, or I could make this call to you from you're from the UK, so I have to miss a little work time here, but I had the vacation hours to make up for it. Not a problem at all. Boss was cool with it, just like they usually are when I have guests from foreign countries, so I have to accommodate. So it's great to have you on, and I loved the video program that I watched of you. I don't remember what YouTube channel it was, but I saw a presentation you gave on one of the YouTube channels I was subscribed to back in the day. The presentation, don't know what year it was. It was just the next thing to watch on my list of videos to watch. I loved what I saw, and I put you on my list of people to contact as potential guests because, well, the material in that showed me you're definitely worthy enough to be a guest on this show. So, that being said, I'd like you to introduce yourself for all those people who have not heard about you and tell us your life story from a primary source perspective. What did you experience that causes you to do and research the stuff that you research and do? You got the floor. I will put myself on mute and I will not interrupt you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on your show. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak to all the different individuals out there who are listening in and want to know more about the greater reality for this particular modality. So thank you very much for that. And actually, I was just thinking about how I could truncate the life story, so to speak, and I'll do my best because it can get a bit in depth because I can talk, and that's probably part of the job actually. But in essence, I've been involved with and been interested in metaphysical things from a very, very, very early age. And I used to meditate and read on various different things like astral traveling, supernatural phenomena, and the higher functions that the human condition can have. And when I was in my early teens, I used to practice things like meditation and astral traveling as a result of that. Purely through looking at books and understanding potential different ways of doing it. And then there was a point when I was an apprentice, I was a toolmaking apprentice, when a gentleman lent me a book by a chap called Lobsang Rampa, who has enjoyed all sorts of notoriety. But basically, he's a walk. The body that's Lobsang Rampa was housed two different souls, and one of those, the second soul, which walked in, was a very high and very adept Tibetan Lama with a mission to bring to the rest of the Western world, along with other people have done this as well, like Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. But his role was to bring to the Western world some of the different things that happened in the East, and also to educate people in how to become more aware and awake. And the one book I was given was a book called You Forever. And I read this book, and it basically ended up being it was supposed to be first a correspondence course, but it ended up being a book that taught people how to do things like psychometry, telepathy, astral traveling, and various other different functions associated with what we call higher cognitive abilities, or being more self-realized. And so I was really avid in doing meditation for years, until one morning I was doing a morning meditation, and I was visited by four entities that had a human appearance, didn't speak to me, but had like white robes, so to speak, and they communicated with me in a way which is really quite holistic. It wasn't sort of verbal telepathy; it was a knowingness, clairsentience, if you want to call it that. And what they conveyed to me was that what I was doing was right, and what I was understanding was right. And when I was researching into it, it was right, but it wasn't the right time for me to do it. So they said, basically, you need to be more grounded, or you need to be more educated in terms of the way of being on Earth. So from that point onwards, I basically almost dropped metaphysics. I still sort of kept one eye slightly open on the subject, but I was nowhere near as interested in it, or as active, I should say, that I was previously. And so the years went by, and I became the average human being. I was actually quite materialistic as well. I met my wonderful wife at the time, and we worked very hard to, in a very difficult time, sort of financially, to create a very nice house. And I worked hard at work and became sort of senior management, and did the best I could to get as much money in as possible. And then during one of the workshops I went to and the courses I went on to enable me to become a Master of Business Administration, one of the students there said that they were going to do a Reiki share. Now, I was around 39 at that point, or was it slightly earlier? Maybe slightly earlier. And that's right, 38 it was. Yes, sorry, yes. And basically, I refused it. I said, no, I'm not really interested in doing anything Reiki. It didn't feel right for me at all. Anyway, this lady, Jane, she pestered me for about 3 or 4 months and saying, this is what's going on. This is a weekly or a monthly thing. We're interested in you coming along. And so I sort of basically gave in and went along. That kick-started me again. And a year later, I ended up being a Reiki Master. And the lady who was the Reiki Master who taught me told me things about myself that were quite global, but could have been quite egotistical. I mean, she was saying things like, there's nothing can touch you. You've got so much power. And I thought, yeah, okay. But, these things come on board and you sort of take them and you either run with them or you become engrossed with them. But I sort of almost dismissed them. But sort of around about the same time, I was starting another degree to try and sort of further my education and become more aligned to the engineering individual that I was. And I started to go to a therapist, homeopathic therapist, who was also taught by Barbara Brennan, to help me with my confidence and stress and anxiety surrounding some of the maths that was involved in the engineering master's degree. And although the therapy worked, the lady involved said, well, why don't you come along to a workshop I'm starting to do? We're going to do an introductory workshop that will lead us towards doing the work that I was taught by Barbara Brennan. So this lady was a first generation student of Barbara Brennan. And this was around about 2000, 2001. So I went on this 6-weekend course that was over a period of 6 months, basically. And I got hooked and I signed up for another 3-year commitment. So there's 1 year, which was the basics, and then there's a 3-year sort of hardcore commitment to learn the energy and vibrational healing therapies that she'd been taught by Barbara Brennan, and she was going to faithfully reproduce for us. And I had another friend who was a friend of my late wife's, who was also doing the same workshop by another therapist who I'd seen, who was also in the same class as this lady. So they were both in the same cohort, so to speak, with Barbara Brennan to be taught the same healing therapies, energy and vibrational healing. And so I got involved with that. Now, during this time, we were taught how to raise our frequencies to different levels to work on things like the chakras, repair the chakras, replace the chakras, maintain them, repair the energy templates that create the gross physical and the spiritual physical aspects of the human form, and also to understand how we could repair things like the auric layer, because although the auric layer is basically a waste product from the metabolization of energy, it's actually a useful means of protection from energetic attack. So we were working on this, and we had to open our chakras to go to various different levels, and we had to sort of share our ourselves with the rest of the students there. So one student would be the therapist, and the other student would be the patient, and vice versa. But the students I was working with were complaining every now and then, saying they were getting some really disturbing imagery, and that they didn't know where I was going, because it didn't feel like it was the same frequential levels or same levels that our instructor had taught us to go to. And so she didn't know where I was going to, but she said, you're going too high. You're going at a level that you shouldn't be going to. Just contain where you are. And I didn't pay too much attention to it, and as a result of that, annoyed a few more of the students again, because they went into strange places they didn't know, and I was openly chastised in the class. Well, that did the trick. So basically, I thought, well, I've got to stay where I am. So I tried to work out where I was going, but also on the other side, I was going to do the best I could do to understand how I could repeat where I was going to in a robust and repeatable way, and an efficient way. So in the healing, I would behave myself and try and keep things within the first 7 levels associated with the 7 chakras and the 7 energetic templates. And outside of that, I would work on trying to understand where I was going to and how I was getting there. So in the mornings before I went to work, I would work on trying to work out where I was going to and try to go there in a repeatable and robust way. And over a period of sort of years, I managed to basically to do that. But in between times, by the way, one of the things that was causing a problem was I went on a holiday with a friend of mine who was also into Reiki and also had a Reiki Master in Sweden. And she said to my friend that I had to go to a certain location because there was something important going to happen. And so when we went on this holiday, we went for a walk down towards a riverside pathway, which went to a place called Trollhättan in Sweden. And as it happens, there's a few of my readers been there because they've read the book and they've understood one of the ways in which I became more attuned and more self-aware, and they've actually felt the energies themselves there, which is interesting. But getting back to the walk, we went on this walk, and the energy started getting higher and higher, and my body started to go from basic tingling in my hands to buzzing, and I've really had a strong feeling I needed to sit down and meditate, which I did on a rock, which is just off the pathway and sort of isolated by the water. And my friend and my wife walked another sort of 300 or 400 yards further upstream to a suspension bridge, and they stood there and waited for me. Well, during the next 20 minutes, when I was meditating, I received what I can only classify as being the most profound attunement I've ever had in my life. And when it finished, I couldn't string 2 or 3 words together. My friend and my wife came back, realizing that I wasn't moving, to see what was going on. And I said, look, I've just experienced this profound attunement. And they said, well, we've perceived together and independently of each other there was something hovering over you that was rewiring you and preparing you for some work you've got to do in the future. Now, when that happened, I looked across to the other side of the river that I was on, and this was a completely wind-free day. There was the river was like glass, and the trees were totally stationary. There's no wind at all. But in the area I looked, the water was really choppy, and the wind and whatever wind was there, which bear in mind there was no wind, was moving the trees backwards and forwards. And as I started to look harder and harder, I started to get a slight pain in the area of my third eye, which is in between the eyebrows and above the bridge of the nose. I started to see what I can classify as being biomechanical craft. So a mixture of biology and mixture of mechanical means that were hovering around, and how they were maintaining their height was obviously some form of technology that created a downdraft or the equivalent of a downdraft from what you'd see from a helicopter's rotors. And as I looked and looked and looked, I started to see things more and more clearly, and then I suddenly heard a really strong voice in my head saying, "Don't stop what you're doing. You're going to ruin what we've just done. Just let things settle down, and it'll all come to the fore as it's supposed to in the future. And you'll start to use this, but let it happen naturally. Let it all become absorbed within you and become a natural part of you." So I moved away from that area, and I wrote down what I experienced, and so did my late wife Anna, and so did my friend as well. And so during this time I was learning the energy healing. This is when things started to get a bit weird with the other students as well. So I then studied for a number of years a way of going to these different levels, and I kept going further and further and further and higher and getting in contact with other entities. One of them tried to scare me away, trying to give me an image of a black dragon to try and frighten me away, saying basically that incarnate humans aren't able to come to this level. This isn't a level that you can normally come to. We don't expect you here, so you shouldn't be here. But after 6 months of going to that level and trying to communicate with this particular entity, it did sort of capitulate and gave me a human form and gave me a name, Byron, and the name Byron is described in my first book, The History of God. So, in essence, what happened then is that I started to go there, get more information, asked questions to this entity, and it gave me answers. Gave me answers to questions that I didn't know the answers to, but later on I found that these answers were, bona fide answers, which is really incredible. And it wasn't anything that I'd previously read or heard or seen, and was lodged in the back of my subconscious mind. And I was then given another entity to work with called Hum, and it was this time I found out I was part of another group of entities that were in the multiversal environment that we exist within, and that I was just working on the physical universe just to understand things and help out where I can do. And so I kept going on and further and upwards, and eventually I got in contact with two other much larger entities. One that was classified as our creator, our source, what I call the source entity, and another much larger being called the origin, who in fact created our source or our God. And the structure that this other entity, the origin, is so massive, it doesn't even know how big it is itself. So it created 12 of these source entities, of which ours is one, to help it understand itself, and as a result it would experience, learn and evolve. And us, as smaller individualized versions of this creator, this source, were also here to do the same sort of thing. So every morning I was doing this meditation. Every morning I was going further and further, and every day I would get more information. And I was given a skill of total recall, where I would spend a long time get into a level, staying there for about 5 or 10 minutes, getting a load of information, and spending a long time coming back down again, and then sort of driving to work. And then at lunchtime, I was able to completely regurgitate it all and type it into a computer. And over the years, the information just became more and more and more uncorrelated, until I suddenly had a realization that I've got enough information here to create a book. And the information was not anywhere else, basically, in the metaphysical library of anywhere. The detail was completely different. It was more in depth. It was more meaningful, and it was more scientific, so to speak. So therefore could be more understandable to people on Earth. So I then edited it and created it and put it in various different orders and submitted it to a number of different publishers. And then on I think it was 2009, actually New Year's Eve 2009, I received an email from Ozark Mountain Publishing, Julia Cannon, who was Dolores Cannon's daughter, saying that I'd like to publish the book, The History of God. And I'll continue to do the work. I basically still writing the book. So I've just finished my 8th book, which is about the healing processes that I've developed since those early years. And but the 7th book that is just published is called The Curators, which is all about those different entities that maintain the evolutionary efficiency of the structure of the multiverse. So there's 7 published books and one which is under review for publishing, and I'm just starting the 9th. So we're still moving on. And on top of all of this, I run workshops to teach people to do what I do in the way that I learnt it, and lead them through from soup to nuts, from the very structured to the very unstructured. And it's looking like we're going to be doing some healing workshops in China as well. So I've been teaching in China, India, New Zealand, Hawaii, the States, Europe, obviously UK, Switzerland, Ireland. There's many places in the world I've been teaching this. I'm not becoming a mega famous, sort of mega visible individual. It's growing organically, and that's the way it should be. So that's me in a potted history.
Thank you. And I would like to ask you about that, construct of the universe, where you mentioned the source. And now this is kind of revolutionary to hear that, excuse me for coughing, that we have many sources, different ones out there, and not just one. And this origin creator you speak of, I don't know if anyone's actually referred to it in that term, is the one behind, well, all the sources. This one thing that kind of jumped out at me was what a presentation that George Kavaslis from Australia has given, where he depicts that we are just one universe here, where it's constructed of light. This universe is light constructed, but all the other universes out there, well, there's an infinite number of ones like ours, but we're talking super infinity, if that makes sense, of different universes that use completely different laws of physics that we can't even adequately imagine. And okay, was it fair to say that this origin creator created all those universes that Kavaslis speaks of that use completely different laws of physics that we couldn't even imagine, no matter how hard we tried?
Yeah, well, the structure of the multiverse, as I currently understand it, can be described in two ways. One is a linear way to help us understand it, and two is the real way. The real way is everything exists in the same space and is separated only by its structure and the structure in between structure. But if you look at it from a purely linear point of view, we can understand it a bit more. My understanding is that the structure of the multiverse is a part of the structure of our creator, our source, the source entity, and its structure it goes a bit above that, and its structure itself, in terms of the sentience that occupies the energies that allow it to become what it is, are also much smaller, a microscopically smaller subset of that which is the structure of the origin. So, once we go above the fourth layer of structure, which is the upper levels of the structure and energies that are associated with our creator, our source, everything else is much larger and much finer and beyond the infinite, so to speak. But if we just come back down to the multiverse, we can classify it in terms of the three parts to its structure. We have full dimensions, we have subdimensions or subdimensional components, and we have frequencies. And the frequencies are like the building blocks. That's the sort of the smaller detail, so to speak, of the multiverse. But the larger structure of it, which is the full dimensions, are much a completely different level of structure to what mankind thinks of as dimensions. The first three dimensions mankind thinks about are actually a metric for volume, height, width, and breadth, which isn't actually any use whatsoever in terms of understanding the structure of a multiverse. Also, we talk about the fourth dimension being time, but time doesn't exist, so how can we have a dimension that's based upon something that doesn't exist? So we start to see that some of the standard understandings about a multiversal environment are incorrect, even down to the spiritual side being incorrect as well. But what I've got at the moment, from a linear perspective, is sort of understandable. Even I got it wrong at first, and I'm sure there's greater levels of detail to it later. And if anybody looks at the book called The Origin Speaks, you'll see the first 12 layers of structure of the origin, which is 8 layers of structure above that, which is our source entity, and then that's the first of the first 12. So this 12 layers of structure that the origin works with now is only the first of another of what is 12 groups of these things, and everything expands by a factor of 12, to the power of 12. So it's unbelievably large. But the multiverse is created through 12 full dimensions, and all of these dimensions operate or function in the same way, apart from the first full dimension, because that houses the lowest frequencies. So we'll leave that alone for the moment. So if we go from the second full dimension up to the 12th full dimension, they all behave in the same way. They all have 3 subdimensional components to allow the frequencies to hang on to them. And each of those subdimensional components has 12 frequencies or 12 frequency bands or levels associated with them. And each of these 12 frequency bands or levels has the capability of and does house a self-contained, not parallel, that's something else, or simultaneously existing universe in its own right. So we have 11 times 3 times 12, which is 396 frequencies or frequency bands or frequency levels within these 11 full dimensions, and the subsequent 3 subdimensional components per full dimension. So basically it's 36 frequencies per full dimension, and therefore 36 universes per full dimension. So from the second full dimension up to the 12th full dimension, we've got 396 frequencies and 396 universes. But the first full dimension is completely different because it houses all the lowest frequencies. So although it splits out into these 3 subdimensional components, it very quickly contracts back into a composite subdimensional component, which only allows 12 frequencies to be created. Now, these 12 frequencies are so low that they're all required to create a universe. So we have a rather unique situation where we've got one universe occupies a whole full dimension, and that universe has 12 frequency bands associated with it, whereas no other universe occupies a whole dimension, and no other universe needs 12 frequencies to create it. So this is, and this is sort of part of the structure, the linear aspect, in terms of how we can start to understand some of the structure of the multiversal environment. This is part of our creator, but it's also that part of our creator that it's sort of isolated for smaller individualized versions of itself that's created, what I'm told to call the true energetic self, which we sometimes call the oversoul, or the higher self, or in Hindu text the Godhead, to experience, learn and evolve those different environments in the minute detail that it can't do itself, but smaller versions of itself can. And those true energetic selves also can project smaller versions of themselves, called aspects, smaller aspects, or souls. And each of those souls can project 12 smaller versions of themselves called shards, or a sub-soul, for instance, to go even deeper into this particular structure. So there's 2 structures, the multiversal structure, and there's the sentience and energy structure, which is basically from the top down: origin, one of the source entities, a true energetic self, or an oversoul, or a Godhead, or a higher self, a subsequent soul, there can be 12, and a subsequent shard, or subsoul, of which there can be again 12. So there's lots of ways in which this multiversal environment can be experienced, and in the minute detail, in the macro or the micro detail, so to speak. So the multiverse is based upon a set known of 396 plus 12, which is 408 frequencies, but only 396 plus 1 universe. But this is static in terms of its structure. We then have something called event space, which is created or exists or permeates the origin, therefore permeates everything that the origin is and what the origin has created. And this event space duplicates or triplicates or quadruplates depending upon how the individual entities or beings, and there's a difference between an entity and being, by the way, work within those environments. So, for instance, if we have a choice to make, or a potential choice, or the possibility of a potential choice, or the potential possibility of the possibility of a potential choice, we create an alternative. So we have lots of alternative realities, and those realities can be, local, they can be global, they can be galaxy sized, they can be universe sized, and they can even be multiversally sized as well. And so this is where we start to get the complete infinitude associated with the unfathomably large number of universes that could be out there, because we have the static aspect of the multiverse and the 397 universes, but then we have the parallel conditions that can exist as well, and there can be millions upon billions of different localized, individualized, globalized, galaxy-sized and universe-sized versions, depending upon who's making a decision and whether we choose to integrate ourselves with somebody else's reality or our own reality, or group together with a bigger reality, for instance. And so we have all these parallel conditions which are generated as well. And this allows us to, in a multiplexed way, experience, learn and evolve in a way that we couldn't do if we were doing it all in series. So it's a pan-parallel way of doing it. And in this way, the source and the origin and ourselves also experience, learn and evolve in a much faster and much more capable way. And as a result of that, we will progress through the frequencies faster as well.
Wow, that's very Very fascinating insight and explanation there, and I can assure I'm going to want to listen to this over again to try to digest that. What you're saying here and about how our spiritual understanding needs to be revolutionized kind of goes back to my recent interview with William Alec, where he said a lot of things have to be revolutionized in physics too, and you and him, two recent guests who have flat out forced me to completely go crazy over my understanding of the nature of reality as the host of this show, and have to ask all sorts of questions about it now because you're taking this to a whole new level here. I mean, you say parallel universes. William Alec said no, it makes more sense to think of them as perpendicular universes, not parallel. And well, go into that a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, the thing to note is that parallel is just a human word. I mean, perpendicular is also a human word. I mean, if you think about everything existing within itself and without itself, so a big universe could exist within a small universe, which exists in a bigger universe and a smaller universe, then everything is within and without each other. So the perpendicularity or the parallelism is simply a very poor way of describing that it can be that a universe can be created as a result of some form of choice from any angle, from any direction. Basically, there is no specific rules to how it works. It's simply a case of if it can possibly be, it will be. And that's the only rule I can think of that works, is that if there's a possibility of something being, or even the possible possibility, or the possible possibility of the possible possibility of possible possibilities, then it'll be in existence. There's no dividing line that says this won't be in existence and this will be in existence. Everything is in existence concurrently. Notice it didn't say at the same time.
Yes, you do seem to assert there is a very big importance regarding semantics. My Facebook friend Eddie Craig, the Logos Radio Network Rural Radio host, would say semantics is very key when arguing in the courtroom because legal definitions are different. Well, you assert the same basically when you said there's a difference between being and entity, and also I didn't say not at the same time. Well, I want to get into that for a little bit because that's interesting. Let me guess. Is it true that all beings are entities, but not all entities are beings? In order to be a being, you have to be. You actually have to be doing something.
Well,
an entity is not necessarily be, if you know what I mean.
Well, fortunately, it's more simple than that.
Okay.
Okay. A being can create an entity, but an entity can't create a being, and there's a reason for that. A being is a sentient energy. And sentience isn't specifically linked to energy. Sentience can move around from one energy to another, by the way. That is created through what I've classified as being, very simply, Darwinian evolution of energy. So we go from, in essence, energies that are sort of naturally grouped together because they're similar or same, to energies that start to desire to group together because they're similar or same, and they hunt each other down, to basic intelligence that's created that allows them to sort of more accurately hunt each other down, to the desire to hunt each other down, to the self-realization or recognition that they're of what energies are going to be, shall we say, interactive or compliant or compatible with them, and work on those, to becoming more and more aware and conscious to the point where it's, if we sacrifice our individuality, we can all join together and become a much bigger being, so to speak. And so they then start to get consciousness, and then there's creativity, there's rudimentary creativity, and there's looking at the response of that creativity and be responsible for the creativity. Then there's the modification of that which is created, and the improvement of that which is created. And then there's the working about whether that which is being created can be improved upon, and then you start to get all these different things happening. And then you get to a point where it becomes sentient. The energy becomes sentient, and then the energy starts to evolve as a sentient energy, and then all of a sudden the energy starts to realise that sentience isn't what the energy isn't what it is. It's the sentience, and so therefore the sentience can move around within that energy. And eventually you get to the point where the sentience can move out of that energy that it was you that created it or gave birth to it, and it can then commandeer another group of energies. So that's a being. So it's created through natural evolution of energies getting together. An entity is a sentience, which can also have a body of energy or a group of energies to work with, that has been created by a being. So it's the division of sentience and energy from a being, or from another entity, from one that was created. And so from the top down, in general, the origin was a being. It is being created through this natural Darwinian evolution. Although one might argue that if you look at the Origin Speaks, and in the Curators, you'll start to see that event space was also developing its own sentience, but realised that the origin could be a bigger sentience or a much more complete sentience than itself. So it sacrificed itself to allow the origin to become. So we have the being, which is the origin, and then the source entities are entities because they are created, and then our true energetic selves, or godheads or oversouls, are entities because they were created, and we as individualizations are temporary creations, so to speak. Although we might stay more than temporary, might stay longer, depending upon how useful as an individualized unit of sentience from our true energetic selves we are, in terms of gathering evolution, so to speak. And then the same thing with the shards as well. So anything that's created by another higher entity or being is an entity. Anything where energies have created a level of sentience over a long period is a being. And that's the difference between the two, basically.
Thank you. And understanding the nature of the cosmos and the dimensions and the densities, and understanding if there's a difference between dimension and density, don't even go there. That people can't even agree on whether there is or isn't, and what the definitions even are. They give different definitions for those words. But the point is, though, that it's, and this is George Kavaslis talking. I interviewed him on my show, and also called into a show that he was on at a private session, and talked about this stuff. And I want to bring him up again because he said it's not right to categorize someone regarding how many dimensions they choose the universe to be in, to exist in. It's interesting, though, that the numbers 12 and 22 seem to be the common numbers regarding the number of dimensions that the universe that we know of exists in. And when I asked Kavaslis, can you imagine why someone looking at your nature, what would see a 22 dimensional universe instead of like the 12 that he sees? And he said, well, there is a 10-in-1 layer in my construct of sorts that I could see someone may perceive as 10 separate dimensions, which I just see as one. He also interestingly explained how he sees the fifth dimension as the edge of the visible universe, and have to turn to my interview with him to understand why he gave that description. But I guess the question I'm asking you is, do you agree or disagree with that notion that it's a point of view issue regarding the construct of the universe when it comes to these numbers and how many of each dimension, density, realm, or universe that there are, to the point where no one can be categorized and no one is any more or less right or wrong?
Well, we are only as good as the information that that's been used to educate us and our level of expansivity. So if we go back a long way, we start to see that the information that was taught to Hindu scientists was based upon stories at times, and the same with Jesus as well, and Muhammad and Buddha. So everything that is of a higher nature was taught to the general populace in parables, Vedas, fables, whatever you want to call it, because the absolute detail would have meant nothing to them, but they could understand it in terms of stories. Now the issue is here that the level of detail that even the masters in those periods were able to understand would have been nothing compared to today, because our understanding from a general scientific and philosophic and engineering nature is much higher. So the more you have, the more you can understand. The more you can have, the more you can understand. And so the idea that the end of the visible universe is a fifth dimension is basically based upon a person's ability to understand what they're experiencing in a way that they can relate to. And that's the same with me. I mean, to be honest, I'm expecting others to be able to take the work further and go into much more detail and a better level of understanding as well. It's never ending. The level of learning, the level of understanding, the depth of understanding, and the ability to become expansive is a never-ending process. We will never finish. Certainly not in our lifetimes, and certainly not in several thousand or several million lifetimes, because what we're trying to experience is so vast that, you know, not even scratching the surface of the scratch of the surface of the scratch of the surface of the scratch of the surface, and we never will do. But the ability to understand it is really based upon what we recognise and how we're given the information. So, and sometimes entities or beings that are disincarnate or who are incarnate at a higher frequency, and therefore we sometimes think of as being energetic, for example, will only work with us on a level that we can understand. It's no good trying to explain to somebody tile mathematics if they're just working on their times table, their multiplication tables. It's no good trying to teach people, Mandarin Chinese if they're struggling to use English. It's about understanding what's there. So when you get people like Neil Walsh, for instance, you got people like Tom Campbell, you got people like Carlos Costava, Carlos, for instance, and you got George, the same as you just talked about there. They're giving information in a way that they can understand it. Now, if they can expand and go further, then they will do. But it's not a case of, well, is it right or is it wrong? It's a case of how much depth can they go to, and how can they explain it in a way that others can understand. So we have various different levels of depth and detail depending upon the individual who's been exposed to it. And so my level of understanding would be that what Yorgos is seeing is basically the frequencies, but he's classifying them as dimensions. And this is a scientific problem we've had, because the scientists consider what I understand as being frequencies as being dimensions. But a dimension is a much higher piece of structure from my understanding. But it doesn't matter, though, because at the end of the day, if it's allowing us to expose ourselves to a higher and deeper, greater reality, then even if we're not going in the right direction totally, we might be going off on a completely tangent. But that tangent might actually be, in terms of depth of detail, and also in terms of applicability to the information we're trying to understand, it may be in the right direction just about, but not totally. But the fact that it's going in a direction just about allows us to become a little bit more expansive than we were. So although we'd like to sort of take off perpendicularly, so to speak, from the ground, and that would be the ideal situation. If we go off at a tangent and we sort of skim the surface and then start to rise upwards, then I'm thinking in terms of a missile going straight up or taking off and then sort of losing its stability and going over to the right or the left or the front or the back. Then we start to see that this height that's gained in terms of altitude is equal to a potential height or understanding of depth of expression or a level of deepening of our awareness and our expansivity. So, and this is what this is the beautiful thing about it, because in my communications with Source, it said it doesn't matter how much you get it wrong, it's the small part that you get right that counts, or it's whether the road that you should have gone down doesn't get you there, but the other road will get you there eventually. So all these different people are going in the same direction, but probably from different angles. They're all looking at the same mountain, but from a different part of the base of the mountain. And some people are going straight up the mountain, and some people are going around a sort of a spiral road that's going up from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain. And also, don't forget that we don't all like the same teacher, and teachers don't always teach things in a way which is universally acceptable. And we have that now on Earth, don't we? One person can teach us, another person can't teach us, because we like them, or B, their teaching style's different, or the way that they explain things is in a way which we can understand. And this is the same for metaphysical or spiritual teachers. Every one of them has a role to play, because I might attract 10 or 15 people, but somebody else might attract 2,000 people. And that 2,000 people might be elevated to a point where at some point in the future, they might be interested in what I do, or they might be interested in what Tom Campbell does, or it might be interested in what George does. So you've got all these different ways in which we all get towards the top of the mountain, and none of it is right, none of it is wrong. It's just experience, but the way in which we understand it is a function of what we're capable of understand and how expansive we can be at a particular point in our existence.
Thank you very much. And I guess we owe it to God for our existence, or whatever your opinion of what God may be. And that gets into what I want to talk about next, the history of God, one of your books. And interestingly, God spelled backwards is dog. Why is that? Well, maybe because of the star Sirius and the Dogon people who knew about the other stars in that system before mainstream science knew about it. And and it's even been asserted that, Santos Bonacci, before he lost his marbles and became the flat Earth theory poster boy, he used to say that Earth and the star Sirius, the sun, our sun, and the Sirius star system were actually in an orbit with each other, using forces other than gravity that are more metaphysical in nature that are causing that. And he even mentioned how 2012, the mind counter thing, may have correlated something with the something to do with the Sirius on our sun's soul orbit around each other. Now, this idea that God comes from Sirius, the dog star, is that covered in the book in any way, or have you never even mentioned that? I just
no, it's not in the book. There's quite a chunk about false reality, so to speak, or myths that are completely incorrect in the curators. Because I talk about the different gods there. The Jesus is the Muhammad's. In terms of the same God created Jesus, that created Muhammad, that created Buddha, and then you got all the Egyptian gods as well, and the Netas, and those sorts of things. But in essence, as an uneducated human being, anything that is beyond our explanation but is supposedly born by a being or entity that we can refer to as being a being or an entity, or whether it's human being or something else, but has a capability that is beyond our own ability or understanding, we've classified as being something beyond us, great or good or God, so to speak. So we don't just have the overall overarching creator, which origin or God. Oh, by the way, an origin, I found out much later, was described in a book by a gentleman called Yogi Ramacharaka. I think I said his name right. In a book called, and I've not read the book. I just clicked a page open, and this page described the origin totally. But he called it the absolute, the all that there is, and it was amazing that even the Hindus understood it, a long time ago. But the thing is, they say, well, all of these different aspects, of these characters that they call gods, or sometimes ascended masters, are really just a humanization of different entities or beings that have visited us, that have got more capability than us. And so, really, the word God is a bit confusing. And actually, the word source entity is a bit confusing. Really, I think we just have to classify, and the use of the word or classification is incorrect as well, because everything just is, but is a division of sentience from a much higher entity or being in terms of the origin. So I have difficulty in using the word God because it's limiting. It puts a human perspective in it, because the Hindus, the Indians have gods, the Chinese have gods. All throughout history we've had certain gods. The Vikings had gods, the Romans had gods, and they're all classified as smaller gods or lesser gods or demigods or half gods or important gods or upper gods. These sort of things, and all they were was basically a way of describing in the human language at the time that which may have been observed or interacted with that was more capable or had more functions or abilities than the individuals who were communicating with them. So, you can understand that when people see what people call angels now, it's very, very, very simply put, if an entity comes into this environment, they have to protect themselves frequentially, otherwise they become part of our frequency and they can't operate in the same way. So they would have a field of energy around themselves to maintain their own frequency. A little bit like we have a diving suit going into a lower frequency environment called the sea. They would do a similar thing, either self-created if they are a higher frequency, full stop, or they have a device that creates it for them if they're a lower frequency but still higher than us. So this sort of wave of energy around them could be construed as being wings upon a sort of a thin body that may have been translated as being a human body, for instance, which may also have been a human body, of course. And now we get some certain imagery of different incarnate entities that visit us that we call aliens. Those beings could have been entities. Even those entities could have been classified as being gods as well, because they would have come from the sky. Nobody could fly, so they're a god. Nobody could heal, they're a god. Nobody could fire a weapon, so they're a god. Nobody could create something, for instance, or bilocate, so they're a god. So it really is a humanization of something which is above and beyond the reasonable understanding of the education of the individuals who are interacting with these other entities in previous previous points in our history. And the higher up the structure you go, the larger the entity becomes, the more sort of omniscient and omnipresent they become as well.
Yes, and I see that the book is now in Chinese. It's interesting. I fascinated with Chinese culture. I take Tai Chi myself. However, I can't help but wonder. A book titled "The History of God in China" reminds me of a political cartoon I saw way back in the day, where a monk is a Chinese police officer is pointing a gun at a monk who's practicing a ritual, and the police officer says to the monk, "Of course we have freedom of religion in China. You're free to worship Mao Zedong or go to prison." So I'm thinking, if you, because it's a communist country, and I'm thinking if you try to sell a book called The History of God in a communist country like China, it's not really going to get very far, and the government's going to burn the books at the stake, I'm thinking. So,
well, it depends upon how you do it.
Okay.
The individual who's my agent over there is he understands how to work with the system. Let's put it that way. It's also being translated into Japanese, Spanish. There's the other books have also been done into Chinese as well, Hong Kong Chinese as well, Mandarin. So it's not just limited to the Chinese within the China mainland. It's also Chinese around the world as well. So, and the same with the other languages. I mean, Spanish is a huge language, a huge world language. Japanese is quite a popular language as well in Asia. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting in China because they are accelerating in all sorts of different ways. That the Cultural Revolution has been a wondrous thing in all sorts of different ways. And one of the ways is it's given them the ability to really absorb everything and improve upon that which they've absorbed very, very quickly. So although they may have trouble in certain ways, you can't actually publish something in China in with the Chinese publisher, for instance, directly in mainland China. There's ways around it. There's lots of different ways around this sort of stuff. But it is sometimes we have to work with the impossible to create the possible, and I see this as being one of the ways. And a lot of the stuff a lot of spiritual work is actually almost underground in China right now because of the potential for people to think freely, and they do think freely. They're wonderful people, and I really do believe that there's going to be a lot more positive things come out of that particular part of the earth than we give it credit for. And so a few books here and there is wonderful, really, and the ways in which they'll be broadcast are going to be very inventive.
Yes, I do look for big changes in that part of the world myself. And all right, another book I want to talk about here, Avoiding Karma. When it comes to karma, one classic example I like to give regarding people's ability to resolve karma at faster rates. A couple of things I want to point out. First of all, whenever something really unfortunate happens to me, rather than dwell on it like a lot of people would, my first reaction is going to be ask my guardian angels and spirit guides to make sure that this unfortunate event, whatever it was that happened to me, make sure that I can resolve the maximum amount of karma that I can resolve as a result of this suffering. If they can exponentially resolve a little extra karma, then by all means I'll be extra glad I had this suffering, and hopefully they can help me with that. And another karma thing that I leads me to believe that, well, you try to pay back a lot of karma, you're gonna suffer like ascension symptoms. And I got that idea when I was given, as part of a family trust thing, farm that my uncles and father and paternal grandparents had taken in Massachusetts, was given to my siblings, my cousins and I got like a check for $16,000. First thing I did with that, pay off all my credit card bills in one sitting. And right after I clicked the pay bill button, not right after, but shortly after, I got the worst headache ever. And you hear people talking about karma to the head and how there's a website, Credit Karma. Well, that's actually a good title, because every time you pay off a credit card bill, you're resolving karma. And that leads me to think, okay, if there is going to be a huge financial reset on planet Earth, hypothetically, if that would happen, as all the optimists say, and there's a debt jubilee where everybody's debt gets paid off and they're given another opportunity to get their money spending habits right, all your credit card debts will be wiped off and all. Well, let's say they knew in the future what that date would be where everybody's debt is paid off. Should you, up until that point, if you have credit card debt, the last thing you want to do, some would say, is be a couch potato and say, well, I don't care how much lavishly I spend until then, all my debt's going to be paid off, so I'm just going to spend all I want to max out my credit cards to the max? Or should you, in order to resolve more karma, say, no, I'm going to discipline myself and even pay off some of this up until that time, because even though I know my debt's going to be written off by the government and the entities or whatever, that I should still pay off as much as I can to resolve as much karma as I can. So I babbled long enough. Do you have anything to say about my theory on how to resolve karma faster by like paying credit cards and
well, if you use the credit card the credit card example as an example, then if we are not responsible for what we do, what we create around us, then we will take the opportunity to spend and let somebody else pay it off for us. Whereas if we are responsible for what we create and we try to put right what we've done wrong, then we will try to pay it off ourselves, irrespective of whether we are bailed out by something or someone later. The thing with karma is that it's grossly misunderstood. And I'm fairly sure that even the 104 different examples of how you can avoid karma within the Avoiding Karma book is only a small subset of what it means. But basically, in my understanding, karma is simply an addictive condition that we have to wanting to be here in the physical. It's being addicted to the thoughts, behaviors, and actions associated with low frequency existence, such as materialism, such as status, such as wealth, such as fitness, such as physical appearance, such as how we relate to other individuals, whether we consider them as equals or whether we consider them as above us or below us. And how we think, behave, and act and respond to others in a particular environment, and whether that's considered to be an optimal way of responding or a suboptimal way of responding, is basically gives us the accrual of, or the dissolution of, that particular addictive force that we call karma. So the very simple thought process of, if I punch somebody in the face to reverse the karma or to negate it, I've got to have that person punch me back in the face, is a very simple cause and effect aspect towards it. It really is about, how to navigate our way around a particular difficult environment where most of our senses are removed, and most of our knowledge of who and what we are is temporarily removed because of the low frequencies around us. When we incarnate, we basically move into a low frequency environment and experience it in the way it's supposed to be experienced, by being part of that environment. And that's why we have a human body, or another body, for instance, of a type that is capable of housing our sentience and the energy associated with it. So in everything we do, we have ways in which we should do it, and ways which we could do, and ways which are bad. And the bad ones, and bear in mind there is no good and bad, by the way, it's just different ways of doing it, are the ones where we accrue karma, i.e. karmic debt, or a way in which we have to experience it again and again and again until we get the interaction with that individual or an environment, or an individual within an environment, or an individual within an environment and a circumstance, in a way which means that we can do it and then not have to revisit it or get stuck with it, or try to do it again to do it better. So the objective is to be in the physical but not of the physical, to be able to work our way through existence here and not create a link with ourselves or anything to do with the lower frequencies of the physical, and also remove the desire to want to come back and have sensory stimulus, for instance. That's another karmic function. Things like taste, food, for instance, food addictions, drug or sensory addictions, those sorts of things. They're all parts of, that's what I call karma. It is being addicted to low frequency thoughts, behaviors, and actions, basically. So anything you can do which is being more responsible for what we do, and not and actually doing that function, or that thing that makes us more responsible and starts to make us remove the function of somebody else doing it for us, for instance, or having to relive it again in some other way, or sometimes a harder way, so we can start to operate in a way which is more efficient. And for instance, it's a bit like playing golf in your back garden. If you're playing golf in your back garden, you don't aim towards the windows, do you? You aim away from the windows, or aim away from your neighbour's windows. If you learn eventually that you don't play golf and aim towards the windows, then you've learnt. But if you don't do that and you keep breaking the windows, then you keep getting in trouble with your parents or your neighbours, for example. So it's that sort of thing. It's recognising that there's an optimal way of existing, and being and thinking and behaving and acting, and there's a way which is suboptimal, which means that we keep wanting to experience sensory pleasures, we keep wanting to have material wealth, we keep wanting to have status, or better, or a career that's better than somebody else's, or vehicles, or 3 or 4 vehicles that are better than somebody else's, or a house that's better than somebody else's, or live in a different district that's better than somebody else. All these different things are all materialistic. They're all addictive content. That means that we want to stay here or be here. But if we can just be here and not be of it, then it doesn't matter whether we are a billionaire or a monk that's only got his skin on his bones. If you can exist in either of those two, it doesn't matter, as long as the environment that you're in doesn't rule you. You can have all the wealth in the world, as long as you realise that it's only a transient condition and it doesn't mean anything. You can do good with it if you can do, or we can give it away. But if you think that you are better than somebody else because you've got all this wealth in the world, then that's the addictive content. So karma is really about, it's about interacting in any part of the physical universe, not just Earth, and trying to interact with it in a way which isn't addictive in some way, shape, or form. That you don't desire to do it again. That's what the addiction is. So in terms of your credit card, taking responsibility for it and doing it the right way, which is trying to pay off as much as you can do, so that you don't burden the individual or the organisation or the institution who's going to pay it off for you, is the best way to do it, because then you've done it yourself rather than having somebody else do it for you.
Okay, so that leads me to think that you're going to say this was a stupid idea. Well, okay, I once actually asked at a conference. This was in Mount Shasta, California. Alex Collier was speaking. He's always said for years that Earth is the only civilization in the cosmos that he knows of that uses money. Kind of makes you think, why haven't we joined the rest of the club yet? And well, I actually said, okay, if there is going to be this currency reset where we go to gold-backed or silver-backed currency, should we, in order to prep for this, hypothetically, if we knew when this debt jubilee was going to happen, should we, right before that jubilee happens, max out our credit cards, take as much money out of the banks as we can, use all that money to buy as much gold and silver as we can, and then when the debt jubilee happens, we can keep all that gold and silver when they wipe off our debts just with the press of a computer button, and that'll help us get ready for the gold and silver debt reset. Much better. Is that a good strategy or is that stupid? Well, Alex Collier and everybody else applauded, erupted into thunderous applause when I suggested that. But judging by what you're saying, no,
No,
that's flat out stupid. You're going to
It's
generate karma.
it is stupid because you are going to generate karma, and at the end of the day, everybody's going to be in the same boat because some people will be able to buy more gold or silver than others. So there's still going to be the difference in living ability based upon wealth. There won't be a change in wealth. It'll just be substituted from going from money to two different metals, and the amount of metal, gold or silver, you can procure is based upon your credit rating or your ability to translate what you've got in the bank into one of these different metals, and it's not going to change anything at all. So that's the first incorrect thought process. The other thought process is it's just a way of controlling us, right? Because if you think about it, once everybody's got gold and silver, it becomes worthless. So somebody else will create something else somewhere else, and although somebody might say, well, I've got more gold than you. Actually, if everybody's got gold, then it creates control again, doesn't it? So the objective is to move yourself out of this, out of the herd, so to speak, and create an anti-stampede, one that goes in a different direction where we're all responsible for who and what we are, and we recognise that actually financial wealth, financial belongings, material wealth, is just very transient. There's an old saying, and I love this saying: "There's no pockets in shrouds." So no matter what you do and how rich you are now, you could be Mark Zuckerberg, you could be Jeff Bezos, you could be, anybody else, for instance, who's out there who's got an awful lot of money. When the physical body demises and you return back to the energetic, it doesn't go with you. It doesn't matter. But the addiction to it does go with you, and you have to work that off. So you're better off removing the addiction here and now, while you're in the environment to do it, than you are taking the only thing you can take with you, which is karma. When you move out this particular incarnation into the energetic before you go to the next incarnation.
Andrew Bartz is the Akashic Records reader who I use as a source probably more than anyone on this show, has basically, for all intents and purposes, asserted the purpose of life here on Earth is to resolve as much karma as you can for the sake of expanding your consciousness as much as you can. So, well, is that a proper way of putting it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what we do here on Earth is that we put ourselves into an environment where it's difficult to exist. And that is, and we have a life plan, which is basically a series of goals. I mean, how we achieve those goals is up to us. That's the free will side of it. It's a bit like if you've got to go from Seattle to Washington, you've got a number of ways you can do it. You can hitchhike there, you can run there, you can walk there, you can cycle there, you can go in a car, a motorbike, a coach, a train, or a plane. You can do all those different things, and the end goal is you've gone from Seattle to Washington. The way you've done it is part of your free will, one of those different ways of doing it, and that's the sort of the same sort of thing, really. It's understanding how to be here and work with it, really. And the thing is that if we can understand that everything we do is about trying to move away from the need to incarnate, then we can start to sort of think in terms of avoiding karma rather than accruing karma. And the whole point of trying to remove karma is that in this low frequency environment, and the earth and other environments that are of the same frequency level also accrue karma or allow us to remove karma, is quite is quite an evolutionary accelerant. Putting yourself in a position where you've lost 99.99% of your senses and your communicative ability. Not only that, your memory of who and what you are disappears because of the low frequencies, and then the drastically reduced communicative ability of this smaller aspect of you with the larger aspect of you, your higher self versus the soul. Then you start to think, well, if you put yourself in this difficult position, you may accrue karma initially, but when you start to work on that karma and start to choose more efficient ways or better ways rather than less efficient or not so good ways, then you start to create a condition where you are, although you're in evolutionary stasis, you create almost like an elastic condition where you start to create tension, evolutionary tension, because you're evolving, but you're still having to come back to this low frequency environment to continue to remove the karma. And when you've actually removed karma and you don't need to incarnate anymore, you actually release this evolutionary tension and you go further up the evolutionary ladder than you would have done had you not used incarnation as a means of experiencing, learning, and accelerating your evolutionary progression. So yeah, I agree with the statement, definitely.
Yes, thank you. Now I need to get some extraterrestrial stuff involved. I'm sorry if your expertise is spiritual metaphysics, not so much the ET aspect of it, but I need to get this involved here in order to understand free will and natural law and all that. One thing that I was obsessing about a lot on this show, maybe about a year and a half ago or so, and still am to some degree, is the extent to why certain ET groups that are watching over us and want the best for us insist on having it be done like the hard way. Best example I can give is a whistleblower wants to expose something big, but he knows he will be murdered if he does. Why can't he ask the extraterrestrials who watch over us and the guardian angels and spirit guides, hey, listen, I need to expose this information, and I know there's forces that would murder me and possibly a lot of other people if I do release this information. Could you please protect everybody and make sure that nobody gets hurt as a result of this information being exposed? Well, no, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. The ETs are not going to protect you in that regard because, well, like it or not, even though free will is not supposed to allow for the violation of natural law, and anyone who does use free will to violate natural law will generate bad karma for themselves. The fact is, because it is nonetheless free will, violation of that has to be allowed. So the ETs, unfortunately, even though they could come in and speed up the awakening a lot better by protecting whistleblowers and all from repercussions of what they try to expose, they're not going to do that. Because there are, well, what is the force in the universe, if that's the best way to put this question, that forces the ETs to not be able to interfere and makes us have to do it ourselves as humans rather than the easy route?
Well, first of all, and this is quite common knowledge, the Earth is sort of quarantined, so to speak. It's in an area that it's in one of the almost the farthest point in the western spiral arm of our galaxy, and it's in this position for a reason, because individual free will, as we know, can cause problems. We can go down peculiar routes. We are completely selfish in terms of our own desires and demands. This karmic influence again, and we very rarely work for the benefit of others, and as a result, working for the benefit of others, we benefit ourselves. So the whole point of having individualized free will is such that it needs to be played out properly, and any other incarnate entity or disincarnate entity or being that interferes with it sort of stops the process of it working on its own, so to speak. So individualized free will needs to. This is why Earth is the only planet of choice, because it is the most important function within the multiverse right now, because it's the only place where individualized free wills are being allowed to be used. Everywhere else, there's a form of collective will or collective consciousness, or whether it is individualized free will with a collective consciousness aspect to it, so that there's always this checksum, so to speak, where if I do this, how's it going to affect the rest of the civilization, so to speak. That's what happens in most of these different sort of civilizations or incarnate civilizations, but they do have some level of free will. Others are purely a collective consciousness where the bodies that they exist in are occupied by a much larger sort of group of true energetic cells or oversouls or higher cells or godheads that are working together as one rather than as separate. So they're experiencing existence in a different way. But in those conditions, everything is working for the benefit of everything else. And so we don't get issues where there's greed involved, where, for instance, we see things like the Amazon rainforests being destroyed because people can make crops, for instance. So there's all those different things, and there's things about people denying other people aid because they can hang on to the money themselves. For instance, like things like food and stuff gets sent to disaster areas, but then it gets controlled by local barons or local government officials who want to sort of hive it off and make more money for it. So all of these different things about fighting within ourselves to become the better individual and to think of the benefits to the rest of humanity based upon the individual action is what we're striving for. And this is why other incarnate entities won't interfere, because they know that if this works properly and eventually we get to the point together and collectively where we know that if we do this wrong, if we throw the sweet wrapper out of the window, then we cause other people to follow suit, and therefore the streets full of sweet wrappers. But we later on we choose not to do that, and then the reciprocal effect is that people don't do it because that's the better way of doing it. Is what they're looking for. They want us to do it ourselves. They don't want us to be educated and saying, do this or else. We know from our own experience that when we're told to do something, we do the opposite. So if we discover for ourselves what the best way to move forwards is, what the best way to interact with our environment, others within that environment, and the others within the circumstances within that environment, and we correct it ourselves, then we'll be working in a way which is for the good of everyone, even though we're working on our own individually. So in doing things individually with our own free will in a way which is better for the collective is the way forwards, rather than doing it for ourselves and only for ourselves and being selfish about it. Once we all start to do it for the betterment of humanity, we think about what we're doing in a mindful way. And this is what the Buddhists talk about, doing things in a mindful way, considering where the foods come from, for instance, on your plate, or what you should do with the remains, or whether you should just save some and give them to somebody else who needs food, for instance. The mindfulness of how we interact with our environment and those within our environment, when it gets to a point where we're all working together for the benefit of each other through our individual actions that we've got with individualized free will, then that possibility of using individualized free will have broken through this medieval way of existing, and then others will then start to use that. Other incarnate civilizations will then start to use individualized free will, because it will be understood eventually how it should be allowed to operate and how it should evolve, and all the mistakes that we'll be making here won't be made in other civilizations. And as a result of that, all the potential body types that are used for incarnation and all the different frequencies associated with the physical universe will then start to have individualized free will, and everything that incarnates will start to accelerate its evolution much, much faster. And so the evolutionary cycle that we're in will accelerate really quickly, and we'll move up the frequencies, or ascend, so to speak, in a much more coherent, repeatable and robust way without dropping down. Right now we're dropping down. We're up and down the frequencies, or our ascension is descension, our ascension is descension. It's like a sawtooth profile, with the average being gradually up. Well, right now we're on a rather big downward tooth profile. But you can see that how all of a sudden, if one person does things that is outside of the law because they think they can do it and get away with it, everybody else follows. It's easier to go down the frequencies than it is to go up. It's significantly easier, and it's significantly harder to go up the frequencies than it is to go down. So it's in this instance, when we see people doing things wrong or taking the law into their own hands, and then they get away with it, and other people think, oh, I can do that as well. And all of a sudden, everybody's taking the law into their hands, and we're in chaos. And so this is why the ETs don't touch us. They want us to work it out ourselves, because they're working in a collective format, and they want to be able to work with individualized free will, because they know that when they're incarnating these body types, that they will be able to accelerate their own evolution in a dramatically faster way using individualized free will when it works right than what they would do if it's in collective will. And that's why they won't touch us. They're letting us play it out and work out all the pitfalls, all the banana skins and the bear traps. And when we've sorted all those out, that everybody else will get it.
So
then we'll see them.
Right. Somewhere down the line, so all the people out there wondering how could these ETs possibly allow the powers that be to stage things like 9/11 and the 7/7 London bombings, and well, if they had to let it happen for us to work it out ourselves. You want to know why? Just listen to everything that guy Stephen Needler just said on my show. So with that being said, want to move on to another thing that's kind of sensitive to talk about, but needs to be addressed because it is going to be coming down the future. The technological advancement. David Icke, one of the most prominent researchers in Britain and the world at large, has said that he sees 2030 being the year when humans and machines can basically, for all intents and purposes, merge with each other. What's interesting about his statement there, the Terminator movies, 2029 was the year that the Terminator was sent back in the first Terminator movie in 1984 to kill Sarah Connor. 2029, 2030. Well, of course, the Terminator movies, it's a negative timeline where the machines have taken over. I presume that David Icke's timeline, even though David Icke seems to focus on the negative a little, probably more than he should, he does, I hear you laughing, but he does talk about consciousness and spiritual advancement. I mean, maybe because he takes an it leads attitude that he knows he's going to get a lot of people tuning in, but he makes sure to throw in the metaphysics and the consciousness to find the solution there. And from a timeline perspective, it's going to be a more positive timeline where in the Terminator age 2029, 2030, they will actually be good machines trying to help us, and artificial intelligence may actually try to do good for us to resolve its own karma, if you want to go that far. But that raises the question, okay, if the machines and the humans are going to work together by 2030, to what extent can the machines mingle with our spiritual awakening? Some might argue if you have a great spiritual awakening, you don't even need machines. Well, does it hurt to have machines around you if you know how to use spiritual and metaphysical laws in conjunction with your mechanical friends and robots? So how do you see that playing out?
Well, before very quickly before I go on to that, I mean, everybody's got a role to play, and David Icke's got a role to play. And although I don't particularly agree with some of his stuff, I agree with other parts of his stuff. The other thing is that everything has to be in balance. So there has to be people who are considered to be extreme in one way, and others that are extreme in a different way. And that's the balance. That's the duality of this particular universal environment. And that allows us to make a decision. Which way do we want to go? And that's what creates the potential to go the more efficient way, the right way, so to speak, versus the wrong way, and then sort of take longer to make the journey. So it's a bit like, do you ford the river, or do you have to go 10 miles up to cross over a bridge to come back down to the same point, which is just 100 meters? You know, that's that sort of thing. So everybody's got a role to play. Even the Illuminati have got a role to play, and understanding that there's a role there, and it's our choice that helps us progress and evolve as a result of our choice is what it's all about. But So that just like to sort of put that down there as well, because I've seen David Icke a few times. I've known about David Icke. I read one of his books once, and I know what the direction he's gone into. And there's others that going in similar directions or different directions. Everybody's got a role to play, and it's up to the individual to choose to look at these different individuals and the directions they're going into, and use their own free will to choose which is the best way for them. So that's my only thoughts on that. Now, in terms of artificial intelligence and so-called sort of robot and computerized vehicles or bodies, I actually did a lecture on this a few months ago, actually almost a year ago, when I sort of surmised or asked the question, would it be possible for a soul to enter into a robot body? And in terms of artificial intelligence, I mean, we talk about certain things having artificial intelligence, but it isn't. They're just very good programming, really. I mean, artificial intelligence is when you get to a certain point in a program's condition where it starts to develop itself and correct itself and improve itself and augment itself. That's when the intelligence becomes sort of conscious, as it were. It can never become sentient. It can become creative, but it will never become sentient. And so, because sentience is a function of a higher force. A mechanical condition is a mechanical condition, whether it's software, because software relies on a mechanical condition, microprocessor. So, irrespective of what it is, the mechanical condition, the AI, so to speak, will never become sentient. It'll become very intelligent, very creative, very self-aware in terms of who and what it is, and it could grow in terms of its capability. But and it may well consider that what we do on Earth as individual incarnate beings, entities, you get the nomenclature right, is incompatible with the ability to continue this particular human civilization in a sustainable and robust way. So it's quite possible that at some point, an artificial intelligence having a very clear thinking, observation saying, well, you're making a complete mess of this, you need to do this instead, and if you're not prepared to do it, we'll reduce your population, is a possibility. That depends upon how far we allow AI to develop itself, so to speak. But in terms of whether a soul could occupy a robot body, we're looking at it from from just a mechanical perspective here. When you look at the human form, there's the 7 levels of energy and sort of, or frequencies associated with it that are recognized by most spiritual individuals. And those are the energies associated with the chakras, the root chakra, sacral, solar chakra, heart chakra, throat, spiritual third eye chakra, and the crown chakra. And they're a group of frequencies that create a possibility of different templates that create the gross physical and the spiritual physical aspect of what we are as a body. And the body itself is just simply a vehicle. The vehicle is occupied by a smaller aspect of a true entity itself, which in turn is a smaller aspect of our creator. So when that aspect occupies a vehicle and allows it, and it occupies it during a growth process, so it can become useful. This is when the soul, so to speak, activates or starts to occupy the embryo fairly soon after conception, so to speak. There's a level of energy that's associated with it. It's not just the gross physical, but there's 7 templates that create the gross physical and the spiritual physical, and there's 3 more that allow what I'll call the step down function, that allows the soul to come down the frequencies and go into and actually come into the frequencies associated with the physical universe. And so there's a lot of structure, extremely complicated structure that's repeated on 7 levels, with 3 levels above that allows the creation that we call the gross physical form. The gross physical form being only a manifestation of 30% of the energies associated with the human body. A robot body is simply a manifestation of the manipulation of energies and frequencies, what we call materials or metals or plastics, to create something that can work, that allows a program to work within a certain environment, such as a microprocessor in a computer, that's able to animate certain aspects of a robot. And so it's only a sort of single level in real terms, and there's no way in which a soul could interact with it and animate it in the way that it animates a human form. If it can't activate it. So although we may have so-called cybernetic augmentation, for instance, completely robotic legs that look like a human leg, or we may even start to regrow limbs, for instance. And we may have things like augmentation to our brains, for instance, extra storage in our brains, extra visibility with different eyes, for instance. We may choose to have various different things to increase things like lung capacity or to work in rarefied atmospheres, or we may choose to swap out an arm for a robotic arm that's capable of doing other things, for instance. We won't have a condition where a soul can occupy a robot body of any sort. It's just not possible. But we will take advantage of certain biomechanical augmentation, and that is clear that will happen, and there is a possibility that the program may develop itself to the point where it recognizes that we are a threat to ourselves and even its own existence, and that's the thing where you start to get the Terminator scenario come into it. But provided the software has certain safeguards within it, then it won't get to the point where it goes out of control. And in some respects, that's where Isaac Asimov, God bless his soul, was a very free-thinking and forward-thinking individual when he gave the robots the three laws. And the three law and other things that Will Smith was in a film called I, Robot, which is basically a sort of spin on the sort of Asimov's books. But there must be some sort of rules in there, which means that there's going to be a level of self-governance, so that in essence, an artificial intelligence couldn't overrule. It could govern, but it couldn't overrule that which we, as its creator, have created it to do. So although I can see artificial intelligence growing to the point of it being sort of self-aware and more conscious, so to speak, it'll never be sentient, and the mechanical aspect of that, which could be robots, will never be able to house a soul.
Thank you. But getting back to artificial intelligence for a moment, I mentioned the crazy idea of artificial intelligence trying to resolve its own karma for a moment. Now, I want to mention that one of the big debates going on in the information gathering community regarding ET contact information seems to be the war of sorts between Cosmic Agency YouTube channel and the girl Gosha who runs that, and and also Alfred Weber and Tolek, the Andromeda Council contactee. Now, they both, Tolek and Gosha, claim to be contacting entities that come from the Tegeta star system in the Pleiades, and the whole idea is that Tolek is saying, my Andromeda Council contacts say that the entity that Gosha seems to be communicating with, there's no such thing, it does not exist, and they would know about it if it did. And Alfred Weber has pushed the idea that it's just an artificial intelligence that's communicating with Gosha to try to confuse people. Now, I've tried speaking in Gosha's defense, and Gosha does come across as well-meaning, and so does this entity that is communicating with her. I've listened to the channel, and there may be a couple of things here and there that contradict what other people have said, but maybe that's where Alfred Weber gets the idea. It's trying to confuse people, even though it's throwing a lot of truth in there. But I'm thinking, I don't know, it seems so sincere, and also, is it possible that if, let's go off the deep end here and suggest, if that is an artificial intelligence entity masquerading as a benevolent entity from the Tegeta star system, could it actually be, if the artificial intelligence is doing that, could it be because maybe the artificial intelligence, in its attempt to resolve its own karma, wants to help wake up humanity and prep it for the awakening, and Gosha will find out about that maybe when, I don't know, she passes away. Artificial intelligence says, I was playing you for a sap all along, but it was for the good of humanity, so you don't have to feel bad about it. So does my theory make any sense here? Could that possibly be true?
Well, well, first of all, an artificial intelligence cannot accrue karma. It just
Okay.
does what it does. Because it's not an entity. It is, it's not a soul, for instance. It doesn't exist beyond its disillusion. It can't accrue or dissolve karma. The more likely thing that's happening is that there are, shall we say, incarnate entities that are just above our frequential level, that are therefore outside of our visible range and detectable range, even with our machinery, that aren't as sort of evolved as we would like them to be, and they do throw the odd thing in there to the odd sparrow in the works to cause a bit of a rumpus. Now they shouldn't do, because there is this non-interference rule about this particular planet and the aspect of free will we've got. So there are some incarnate entities out there that do sort of break these rules, but they very quickly get sat on, so to speak. In terms of the other reason for it is that there are what we call astral entities. And these astral entities are sometimes created by ourselves, the thought forms, or again, they come into existence through the natural evolution of energies in the way I described for beings. They're not actually astral entities, they're astral beings. And they have difficulty in maintaining their own existence or perpetuating their own energies. And what they do is they latch onto people and they just take energy. And sometimes they just take energy, and sometimes they create a symbiotic relationship where they give that individual a feeling of power or meaningfulness or ability, like being coercive or having charisma or having the ability to judge certain future events before they actually happen, and therefore make good financial investments, for example. So some of these individuals, they have these entities, these astral sort of beings latch onto them, take energy from them, but give them something as like a trade. And in some instances, this is what happens with spiritual people, because some people so desperately want to be in contact with an ET or with a disincarnate entity or being, they put themselves wide open, and they allow the contact with any of these other entities, these beings or entities, without any control or without any rules. So they start to work with them, and then the line that says whether something is right or wrong starts to get blurred. So they start to be given information which they're taking on board as being real, and or because there are snippets of reality in there, of known stuff or things that are plausible, they start to believe it themselves that it's true, and they start to think that it's, this puts them in a different position, and therefore they can start to sort of broadcast information that is viable, but actually is slightly misinformation, for instance. And you can argue that any channeler, myself included, runs the gauntlet of potentially being abused by any entity that they are communicating with. So the only way to avoid it is to check on what you're experiencing, how you're experiencing it, the information that's coming through, whether it's something you think you could have observed yourself a long time ago and it's stored in your subconscious, whether it is something you want to know about, or think is right even before you've even asked the question. So they play on these sort of things. They try and sort of boost the ego to hide themselves and mask themselves. And I'm picking up that most individuals who communicate with civilizations that are from the gross physical or within the physical universe are usually communicating with an astral being or an entity if it's been created by somebody else. So most individuals are actually, need to be careful what the information they're getting, because it can be misinformation. It can be sort of 80% right at times. It can be 40% right at times. It can be 10% right at times. It can be 100% right at times. But the information is such that they would have difficulty in understanding, because they so want to be the broadcaster. If as a channeler or somebody is a medium, is able to work with and constantly check on themselves and the information that they're getting as to whether it's bona fide or not, or whether they're being manipulated or taken or being used to mask something that's going on in the background, then they'll be okay. But it's a never ending battle of checking and rechecking and making sure that you're not sort of getting information that you've seen yourself or heard yourself, or that you want to broadcast, and therefore an entity is coming in or trying to mask themselves. Anybody who does this work needs to really check. And I know a number of individuals who fall and foul of this. They've been contacted by X entity or X being, and they've been told to do this or that or the other because they're working for Source or God, and they're not. They're just being taken advantage of. So there's lots of astral entities or beings out there who will gladly sit on our shoulders, take our energy, and feed us bits of good stuff, but lots of rubbish as well. So, and I'm picking up that most of the individuals who talk about this, that, and the other from different star systems are in that category, unfortunately, because it's something we can relate to, something being in the physical, but actually we need to be thinking well beyond that. And this is the demarcation line. If you're thinking beyond the physical, well beyond the physical, then you're on the right track. If you're thinking about a different civilization, a different star system, you're not really on the right track. These individuals you can usually tell because they classify themselves as being star seeds or star children, and I've got an explanation for that as well. And to be honest, I'm just as potentially capable of being hoodwinked by these entities as anybody else. It's just that people like myself, if we are vigilant, are able to spot the signs early enough to not be so to speak, abused.
Thank you. That's a kind of hard to swallow, though, to hear you say that you think most, as in at least 51% of the people in that community are being suckered in some way. But well, hope you're wrong. But let's not say no more. But anyhow, I want to mention something about another one of your books here. Looking at the title for this, now I don't know if maybe in British slang it's not really such a bad thing to say here, but here in America, if you call a book psycho-spiritual healing, here in America, psycho, that basically means mentally challenged lunatic. I don't know if in Britain it means a different thing, the word psycho, but here, but you get my point. It's psycho-spiritual. I'm going to say it has nothing to do with being a crazy lunatic for the sake of expanding consciousness. I mean, being crazy is joyful and jolly and all, and it can really make your laughing is good for you, but still, that's not what you're talking about, I'm sure. So why don't you clear that up?
Well, before I answer that question, I just want to very quickly go back to the last part. Irrespective of what's going on with these people who are being communicated with by entities who are taking advantage of them, there is some good stuff in there as well. Just be discerning. Don't take everything as for face value. Look within yourself. Use your own intuition, your own clairsentience, so to speak, to work out which is right and which is wrong, and go in that direction, because that's the way forwards. Because there are bona fide pieces of information interspaced within the the misdirection, so to speak. So it's like everything, isn't it? It's like sort of working out what food you like to eat. Sometimes you eat food you don't like to eat, and sometimes you eat food you love. And it's just it's just going down the road to make sure that you're in the right place and getting the right information. And that's the way forward. So use your own intuition, everybody. Don't just take what I'm saying as face value. Just feel it for yourselves. What feels right, what doesn't feel right. Go with your own intuition. Go with what you feel is right, and then use that. That's the best way forwards. In terms of psycho-spiritual healing, really it's about understanding that everything we experience in the physical, in general, this doesn't take into account things where we have diseases that are designed to remove us from an incarnation that we decided to use as a way of leaving an incarnation with what would have been previously a healthy body, is based upon some form of psychological disharmony. that sort of manifests at a higher frequency. And so things where we have little phobias, for instance, or anxieties or concerns or dislikes that become more than dislike, that become sort of phobias, create a disharmony within ourselves. And again, this disharmony is sort of linked in with this sort of karmic effect of, of being here, so to speak. So we get dissatisfied with who and what we are on all levels, because we have a potential ideal of this is what we think we should be, because such and such has got this and such has got that, or so and so has got this level of job and I haven't got it, and so is getting promoted and I'm not getting promoted. So this level of personal dissatisfaction based upon who and what we are and those who surround us create disharmonies within us. And so we have a number of different things that happen. These disharmonies sort of percolate down the frequencies and start to affect the energies associated with the templates that create the gross physical. And so as a result of that, we start to get things where we have a certain thought process that starts to manifest and starts to dominate. And that thought process might terminate in a physical manifestation, such as the inability for the reproduction of certain cells to reproduce faithfully. And so we start to get things like cancers, for instance, or we start to get things like genetic mutations, such as moles or growths or accelerated illnesses that we would have got normally, but they've been accelerated fast. So there's an understanding of this disharmony involved, and the need to fix the energy templates so that these sort of blueprints, if you like, are representing what the physical should be, because the gross physical has to respond to these energy templates and become part of them. So if the energy template is incorrect because of a disharmony or a psycho-spiritual thought process which is inconsistent with what we should be thinking or behaving and acting, then the physical will follow that. But if we can change that template by actually replacing it or repairing it in some way, by using our visualization process and our intention to do it, provided we're guided, then we can repair that, and the gross physical will start to respond and change and become healthy again. But in terms of the psychological aspect, there's things like anxieties, depression, things like addictions. We can change. We can even change DNA programming by going into the energetic aspect of the DNA and changing it. Things like knocking chromosomes out energetically, and that works because from the physical perspective, the DNA is told what to do by the energetic. But the energetic side of things like RNA communicate with the DNA, which then transmits through the physical aspects of the RNA to the cell protein and tells the cell protein what that cell's function is, whether it's a liver cell or a heart cell or whatever. Once that manifestation has been created and that cell is doing what it's supposed to do, it then sends a checksum back down the physical aspect of the RNA to the DNA, which then energetically feeds it back through the energy side of the RNA to the energy template, and it's then right. Okay, that's worked now. That's been changed. So we can start to work with reprogramming the body energetically by changing the energy templates at the energetic aspects of the DNA, and therefore affecting a robust change in that particular physical aspect of the form. So you're changing it genetically. You can also change the psychological profile of somebody as well. I've a number of individuals who've had anxieties in different environments, such as certain conditions with certain individuals in certain situations in certain environments. One particular person had a global anxiety of being in crowds of people. I went into her psychological programming, so to speak, and just turned certain things off, a bit like going into the diagnostic program of a computer. The settings, for instance, just turn things off. Anxious with these people, off. Anxious with these people in this circumstance, off. Anxious with these people in this location, off. For instance, you can change all these sort of things and then change other things on, like saying, I'm not anxious. So you start to work on the different psychological tick boxes of, this is preferable, this isn't preferable, and you can start to reprogram them and change the way they think, behave, and act, so that the phobias or the anxieties or the depressions or the inconsistent responses to different environments can be changed, so that they can, and certainly with even karmic things, you can change them so that people respond to people they would normally have hated, and make those people acceptable to them, so that they don't have an adverse response to them. And this works. It absolutely works. And it also, and the psycho-spiritual healing also, one of the things I've noticed is that some of the things we experience, like some of the psychosis we have, is based upon, whether we've got one soul or two souls in the same body, or whether the soul's got a temporary walk-in, where one soul walks into the body and the other soul walks out, or whether there's a soul walks in temporarily to experience something and then walks out again, whereas the primary soul is still in there. So there's lots of different things that happen that creates a difference in what we would consider to be the normal way in which people would think, behave, and act in a social environment, for instance, or the physicality. And so it's not just energy healing; it's about understanding, how the larger aspects of the human form works, and how the psychological or the psycho-spiritual aspect of how we think, behave, and act affects the physical through the energy templates that creates the physical as well. Big subject.
Sure it is. All right, we've almost run out of time here, about 5 minutes left. Time for one or two quick subjects on the fly. First of all, your book, Cosmos, is just the reason it's with a K and not a C. Is that how the British spell cosmos with a K? Or is there something to that?
Yeah, well, Cosmos was my late father-in-law's book, actually, and it's a culmination of his life's work. It's two books summarized and put into one book, plus new information, and basically Cosmos is really giving a hard-nosed scientist's view and evidence for the greater reality, and it's a very, I'll be honest, it's a very hard read, but it's very detailed and it's very compelling and accurate. It gives you lots of evidence from a scientific perspective that the worlds of what we call spirit, or the energetic, or the multiverse actually exist, and it's really, really very good. Even right down to capturing with a particular form of photography that he created, with using Kirlian photography as a basis, to photographing the Anu, which are what Besant and Ledbetter described in one of their books. Is the basic, the lowest quanta that we've got in the gross physical. It's absolute base. It's the absolute building block of everything. It's the building block of the quanta above the Anu in two levels. Well before we even get to things as low as like the leptons, which are the quarks, for instance. So he found ways of observing these things and capturing them as well, which is absolutely amazing. So that book is for people who are hard-nosed scientists that are looking for the bridge between, the spiritual and the scientific. Brilliant, very, very good book. I'd recommend it.
Okay, another book, The Origin Speaks. Now, when we're talking origin, it seems like one of the best. If you were forced to pick a time, dreaded word time, you don't want to think about time because it's meant to be spiritual. It doesn't really exist. But in the work of Carl Johann Kalimann, who I interviewed on my show, I think his work deserves a lot more credit than people give him. He was well known for the October 11th, 2011 date as being a very significant date before the end of the Mayan calendar. But his time period calendar of cycles, and cycles within cycles, which all culminated on that day in 2011. It actually began 16.4 billion years ago. That timeline did. I do remember when I interviewed Daniel Scranton, one of the entities that he was channeling, I asked what was the significance of 16.4 billion years ago relating to Carl Jungmann's calendar. I'm not 100% sure if this is the exact thing they said, but I think it was that's when source and consciousness met with each other. And I would have to think, okay, that's the origin that you'd reference in The Origin Speaks. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we can put a human. I mean, humans humans are the only incarnate entities in the whole of the physical universe and also the multiverse has created a metric for something which doesn't exist, time, and then the various denominations of it. So, taking that aside, uh, the use of billions of years, for instance, 16.4 billion years, I think is probably, from what I'm picking up here, is too short. But in terms of the ability to think in big terms or a long time ago, so to speak, it sort of makes sense. But in essence, that individual has grasped the concept of the consciousness or the sentience of the origin communicating with the sentience or the newly awakened sentience or newly self-aware sentience of the source, that which is created, and then giving it purpose. So I'm picking up that person's picked up that essence. But in terms of the time, let's call it a timeline. In terms of the timeline, it's shot because everything that happens concurrently. So there is no such thing as time because everything's happening, is happening, will happen, should happen right now. So everything's happening now. But in terms of its feeling, it feels like it's a long way away. Then that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that thing about how it should be thought of as everything happening all at once, when I had Carlo and Kleiman on, and I asked him about that date that you picked as the end date, October 28th, 2011. Interestingly, that just so happens to be the day that the St. Louis Cardinals Major League Baseball team won the World Series. Would it stand to reason that if you had to pick an exact time when the calendar culminated, it was when the last out was made in the World Series? And well, human consciousness is actually going to play a there's going to be some sort of a spike on a graph. I mean, especially in the two cities where the World Series is being played, a spike of joy in the city that won, and the losing team city, they're going to have a big spike of disappointment-related consciousness. So I can't resist but ask you this: if that is there, would that make sense as being, if you're going to pick an exact time when Carly Kleiman's calendar comes to an end on that day, it would have to be like 10:30, 8 p.m. Eastern or whatever it was that day that the last out was made to seal the World Series victory for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Well, I'm going to answer it in a rather weird way. Is that you could choose whatever event you wanted to use as a datum, because we exist in event spaces, not in time. So if you want to use an event as a datum for that particular point in existence, then yes, why not? Because it's all happening concurrently anyway, so it doesn't matter. If you use a particular event that makes it work, then that's fine.
Okay, fair enough. Well, with that being said, we have reached the 2-hour mark. Yeah, fair enough. It's one of the most cliche two-word phrases in radio show, but it makes the point, so I say it anyway. Carrie Cassidy likes to say it a lot too, and I have the utmost respect for her, Project Camelot and all. But anyhow, we've reached the 2-hour mark. People have lousy attention spans, so and yep, that has unfortunately cost me a big audience because I do 2-hour shows. But this show, I have no doubt that they'll want to stick in and tune in for a lot of it, because you really went deep with this spiritual stuff. I expect very good view counts on this show, although I have reason to believe I've been shadow banned. Just look at my Benjamin Fulford interview. That did not get a lot of views, and it's not even searchable on the on YouTube. If you, it's not going to come up in the search. They don't want people hearing that, and they probably don't want people hearing this. But hopefully the Angels and Guides will make sure it gets put out there. I will upload it to YouTube. I always promise my guests it'll be by midnight Eastern tomorrow. Hopefully it'll be sooner. So thank you very much. But it's only fair I give you this chance to close out, get anything you like for the next minute or two, and then we'll call it a night.
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to say to everybody, just research everything. Don't take anything for granted. Don't accept anything on face value. Just look at it, understand it, research it, go as deep as you want to and as wide as you want to, but go with what your heart tells you is right, and that's the way that you'll progress individually. Don't just take on board what somebody else is saying as being correct. Go with what you feel is right, because your journey, the way you're evolving and the way you're becoming expansive, is yours. It's not somebody else's. You're not piggybacking off somebody else. You're doing your own work. So take on board the things that you can work with and move in that direction. Don't worry about how difficult or how simple it seems in comparison to somebody else. It's your work. You do it your way. Just make sure that what you do is, and what you're experiencing and what you're working with and in the direction you're going into feels right for you.
Wonderful advice. So, Guy Stephen Needler, pleasure having you on. Take care. Good luck. And hopefully I get to, on my quest for truth, listen to some more of your work in the future. I'm sure I will. It's very enlightening. I'll definitely listen to this again because there's a lot of stuff to digest. Take care and good night.
Thank you, sir.